Content of the video. As we now learned how to register a service in the DI container, and we also learned how to use existing services a bit more in depth, it's time to create our own service, a little helper which accomplishes some rather simple tasks maybe, but one that can be reused and one that's simply useful to be encapsulated in an own service and be retrievable through the DI container. So make sure you reinstall the plugin if you followed the last step from the last video. So going back to the plugin manager, simply reinstalling and also activating the plugin. Yes, we're going to clear the caches. And also activate it. So this is up here. So I'm going back to the front end of the shop. And I'm also going back to our routing demonstration page. Oh, we have to log in again. So what I want to do in this video is simply write a service that puts out or that retrieves a list of products and simply shows the name of the products afterwards. So the service is there to fetch all the product names from the database, and we make a little template extension which shows the list of the product names afterwards. So first of all, I'm just gonna close all these open windows here to have it a bit more clean. And the next thing we are going to do is create a new file called product name service inside a directory named services inside our plugin directory. So services / product name service.php. This file is going to contain the old definition of our service. So we have to give it a proper namespace. And then just a simple class definition. So we want the service to have a method called getProductNames because we want it to fetch product names from the database. And database being the keyword, we need to get the database somehow or get the connection to the database in order to make queries against the database. So if we were inside a controller, we could do something like this, get, and then enter the corresponding service ID because the database is registered as a service. We could simply retrieve it by saying dbel connection. Because in our case, we use the dbel connection as an abstraction layer for our database. But since we are not inside the controller and we are also not inside the plugin bootstrap class, where we could simply say this container, like this container, get dbel connection, this wouldn't work either because we are isolated in our own service. So we have to somehow inject this service into our own service. So in order to do that, I say private connection and just type in this as a connection. And then we have to let this inject this somehow into our service. So I'm going to write a constructor which takes the connection as a parameter. I'll say connection, and then this connection equals the parameter connection. And now we can say right-click, create service. And this, in the first place, creates a little service definition for us. So we can copy this and paste it into the resources services XML. So there's one thing missing, and PHP Sum is already type hinting this. It's saying missing argument. So we could say Alt Enter, and PHP-Sum automatically fills this for us, but it doesn't really know which service to inject there. So we have to tell it, and we're simply passing the ID of the service in there, which is the debug connection. And having it set up this way, Symfony knows that we have to inject, it has to inject the debug connection into the constructor of a product name service. So we can be sure anytime we are creating the service, we get the debug connection injected automatically, and now we can simply use the connection to start working on it. So what I'm going to do first is create a query builder, which is a small helper tool which lets you define queries in a pretty abstract way in order to have a layer between where you define queries and the generation of queries for your dedicated underlying database system. So the reason for that being that you can use different database systems like MySQL, like PostgreSQL, and this simply abstracts this system-specific queries away from you. So we want to get a new query builder. Saying this connection, create query builder, will give us an instance of the query builder. So in order to start writing a query with a query builder, we say this query builder or just query builder. And first thing we specify is the table or the columns we want to select and from which table. So we say select, and this takes an array of columns. And we only want to have the name. And also we specify the table by saying from, and we're going to say as articles, because we want to fetch the names from the as articles table. And then we're simply going to say set the maximum number of results to 20. And in the end, we want to execute this. So we can also say this is the result. And now we have to fetch the result into an array. In order to do this, we say product names equals result, fetch all, and then we are going to return just this. So what we do now is select the name from the table as articles and get no more than 20 articles, and then fetch this into an array and return this whole thing. We could also just write return here. Let's do that. That's a bit cleaner. So now we want to use the service, right? So we have set up the wiring, we've set up the argument, we have made the service registration. So now we want to use it. So let's step back into the controller. And I'm going to the index section. And now we have to get the product name service. So I'm going to set up a variable named product name service. And in order to retrieve the service, we just say this get product name service. I'm just taking the shortcuts because, because I can. And then we say product names equals product name service get product names. Easy as that. And eventually we have to assign the product names to the template in order for them to be displayed or at least available in the template. We still have to implement the rendering of it. So we say this view assign product names and that's it. So as we got the product names fetched and handed into the template, we have to fit the template in order to display all of our products. So I'm going into resources, views, routing demonstration. And since we are passing it inside the index action, I want to, well, edit the index template. So inside here, I'm going to get rid of this widget call. And then I'm going to say for each product names as product name. And then I want to, well, just print out the product name. And to make this a bit more pretty, I'm just going to wrap it into a unordered list and wrap these into list items. So now we go back to the page and see if it worked out. Well, I guess this counts as a partial success. We obviously are having 20 different entries here, but for some reason we're getting arrays instead of the product names. So in order to backtrack this, we can make a little of a kind of debug output. So to do this, simply have to type debug within curly braces and then reload the page. And you see up here it says pop-up blocked. So click this and say, okay, enable pop-ups or allow pop-ups. And then again, reload the page. And you will see a little window appearing here. This is the Smarty debug console, and it shows you all of the variables that have been passed into the view. So all of the variables that are available. So we can see product names, which is the one that we assigned to the view before, right? This has 0 to 90 different entries, but it has an array containing the index name and the name as the value of the index. So it's quite obvious why this isn't working. So what we could do is simply say name, and then it will work, right? So I just reloaded this, and now it's showing the names instead. But we can do this a bit more cleaner. So let me get rid of this again. I'm also getting rid of this debug command here. And I want to go back into the service because I want to show you something. So down here we said result fetch all. And what fetch does, it actually takes the all the records inside the result and parses them into an array. And depending on how you do this, you can either end up with a multi-dimensional array or a really flat array or a array indexed by numerical keys or by associative keys. And you can control this by passing a fetch mode to the fetch function or the fetch method call. So there are different fetch modes available. And all of these are present inside the PDO class. So if you type PDO, you will see there's a number of different fetch modes. And the one we want to use is the fetch column. Because we only selected one column here, we can say fetch column, and this will fetch us the all result records into a single flat array, which just contains the single column that you've selected. So I did this. And we're simply going to print out the product name like we did before. And you see as I reload, we are still getting the article names printed out here. So this is, well, the end of the part about services. So we learned how to write the own service, how to register it inside the services XML. We also learned how to pass an existing service, in this example the dbel connection, as an argument in order to have it available in our constructor. And this is also the end of the old training. I hope you have learned quite a lot and you enjoyed it as much as I did. So if there's any comments or any questions you still have, feel free to comment underneath, and otherwise see you next time.